My name is Avery Crane. I was 34 years old the week my entire family decided I had stolen from them. And the strangest part of all of it, I had not taken a single thing. I had not asked for a single thing. I had not even been in the room when the decision was made that turned me into a thief in their eyes. My grandparents died on a Tuesday in a small plane that never reached the wedding they were flying to. I found out from my brother Trevor, who asked about the will before he asked if I was okay. 6 days later their lawyer read that will aloud in a quiet office, and every head in that room turned and looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has just walked off with something that did not belong to her. I thought the funeral was the hardest part. I was wrong. 2 days after the funeral they came to the house with a moving truck and a man I had never seen before, and I understood that the funeral had only been the beginning of something much longer and much colder. What I had quietly done in the 48 hours before that truck rolled into the driveway is the only reason I am able to sit here now and tell you this story with a steady voice and a steady hand. Welcome to a story about boundaries and dignity, and the moment a quiet woman finally stops apologizing for existing. If a story about standing your ground speaks to you, then settle in, because this one is for you. Drop a comment below telling me where you are listening from and hit that subscribe button if you believe the quietest person in the room is rarely the weakest. It was a little after 7 in the evening when the phone rang, and the old wind-up clock in my hallway was still ticking its slow patient tick the way it had ticked through every quiet evening of my adult life. I almost let it go to voicemail. Trevor never called me. We texted twice a year on birthdays, the way you wave at a neighbor you do not particularly like. So I answered. And his voice came out wrong. Flat. Quick. Stripped of everything that usually filled it. It is Grandma and Grandpa, he said. Their plane went down outside Asheville. I sat down on the floor right where I was standing. I remember the cold of the wooden boards through my jeans and the clock counting off seconds I could not feel passing. They had been flying to a friend's wedding. A couple they had known for 50 years. I asked if anyone had survived. He said no. And then, before I could breathe, before either of us had said a single soft word about the two people who had raised half of my childhood, my brother asked the question that told me everything I needed to know about what was coming next. Hey, he said. Do you know if they left a will? I did not answer him. I just listened to him breathe, and to the clock ticking, and to the strange hollow space where my grief was supposed to go. He filled that silence for me. He said the family would figure out the estate together. He said it the way you say a thing you have already practiced in front of a mirror. I told him I had to go. I hung up and I sat on that floor for a long, long time. And the only sound in my entire house was that old clock. The one Grandpa had taught me to wind when I was 9 years old. I did not cry yet. Not one tear. Because something else had already started moving inside me. A slow, cold awareness that my family had been planning something while my grandparents were still alive and breathing and laughing. And I was the only one who had not been invited to the meeting. The will was read on a grey Monday in the law office of Walter Howard 6 days after the crash. Walter was 71 years old. Slow-moving. With a handshake like a vice and eyes that did not miss much. He had served with my grandfather a lifetime ago, in a war that neither of them ever talked about. The whole family came in black. My father Gerald sat in the front row with his arms crossed tight across his chest. My mother Brenda dabbed at eyes that stayed dry. Trevor jittered his leg the way he had since he was a boy. Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, sat one row back with a yellow legal pad already open on her knees, like she had come to take inventory rather than mourn. I took the chair at the end. The way I always did at family gatherings. Close to the door. Walter cleared his throat and put on his reading glasses. He thanked us all for coming. He said Raymond and Joan Crane had been deliberate people, and that their final wishes were extremely clear. Then he started reading. And the entire room held its breath. I expected the house to go to my father. I expected the savings to be split evenly between him and Aunt Carol. I expected honestly to be mentioned somewhere near the bottom of the document. A keepsake maybe. The clock if I was lucky. Instead Walter read my name. He read it again a paragraph later. He kept reading it. I felt the air in the room change before my brain caught up to the words. My mother's pen stopped scratching across her paper. My father uncrossed his arms one slow motion at a time. Trevor's leg went completely still. Walter looked at me over the top of his glasses. Not unkindly. And then he looked back down at the page like a man who knew exactly what he was about to set loose in that room. My mother laughed. One short sharp note with absolutely no humor in it at all. There must be a mistake, she said. Walter did not look up. There is no mistake, he said. He set the page down. He folded his hands on top of it. And then he said the sentence that ended one version of my life and began another. Avery is the sole heir. The estate passes entirely to her. He let it sit in the air. $40 million. The house on the lake. The land. The accounts I had never even known existed. He said the numbers plainly the way you read coordinates off a map. And the room came apart in slow motion around me. My father said my name like it was a curse word. My mother said the word soul 3 separate times like the word itself were broken, and she was trying to fix it. I did not say anything. I was thinking about the summers. I was thinking about the dock I had repaired by hand the year I was 14 years old while everyone else in the family was at the country club. I was thinking about my grandmother teaching me to bake bread that never once rose properly, and how she laughed every single time it came out flat. Walter kept going. He explained that the will had been signed 2 full years earlier in his office. Witnessed by 2 disinterested parties. Recorded on video. He said there was a physician's letter on file confirming that both of my grandparents had been of sound mind on the day they signed. He said it twice. Slowly. And I realized he was not telling me any of this. He was telling the room. He was building a wall in front of me brick by brick while everyone watched. Then he looked at me directly. There is also a letter, he said. Handwritten. For you alone. Your grandmother asked that you read it when you were ready. And not before. I nodded. I did not trust my voice. Behind me I could hear my mother and Aunt Carol whispering fast and low. The way you whisper when you are already drawing up a plan. My father stood up, buttoned his coat, and walked out of the room without once looking in my direction. The door clicked shut behind him. The clock on Walter's wall kept ticking. And I understood in that moment that the grief I had been waiting to feel was going to have to get in line behind something much larger. They were waiting for me in the parking lot. My father stood by his truck with his jaw set hard, and the grey sky pressed down on all of us like a hand. I tried to walk past him to my car. He stepped directly in front of me. It should have gone to family, he said. And I had been hearing the rough edges of that sentence my entire life. But never the whole thing. Never out loud. Never to my face. I looked up at him. I am family, I said. My father's face did something complicated for half a second and then closed like a door slamming shut. He turned away from me. That was always his answer to anything true. The turning away. Trevor came up beside him. Hands in his pockets. That loose, entitled slouch he had carried since he was a teenager. You do not even live here, Avery, he said. You have not lived here in 12 years. As if a house were a reward for staying close enough to want it. And in his mind maybe it already was his. Because for as long as I could remember the entire family had spoken of the lake house as Trevor's someday. The place he would raise his kids. An inheritance everyone had agreed on without once asking the two people who actually owned it. I did not answer him either. There was nothing I could have said that they were ready to hear. My mother appeared last. And she did the most frightening thing of all. She softened. She put her hand on my arm. She looked up at me with wet, careful eyes. "We are all grieving, sweetheart," she said. "We will talk soon. When everyone is calmer." Her voice was gentle. Her grip on my arm was not. I had spent 4 years in the army learning to read what people meant underneath what they actually said. And what my mother meant in that moment was simple. She had not given up. She had only changed weapons. I got into my car. I sat there for a moment watching the three of them confer in my rearview mirror. Heads bent close together. My father gesturing back toward the law office. Then I drove out to the lake. To the house that was somehow mine now. And I tried to remember how to breathe. I should tell you who I am because it matters very much for what comes next. I spent 12 years in the army. Most of it in logistics. People hear that word and they picture clipboards, and they are not wrong. But a clipboard in the wrong desert is the difference between men eating and men not eating. My job was to make sure the right things reached the right people at the right time, and to write down everything. Because in that line of work, memory is the very first thing that betrays you. You document. You date it. You keep the file. After I got out, I did not go home. I took a small apartment 20 minutes from the lake and a job coordinating supply for a farmers cooperative, and I kept to myself. I told people I valued my privacy. The truth was quieter and worse than that. I had grown up the spare child. The one whose graduation no one drove to see. The one my father had once introduced to a neighbor as our house guest. And then laughed like it was a joke. You learn after enough of that to stop reaching for people who keep their hands behind their backs. So I built a life that did not require them. The only place I had ever felt fully seen was the lake house. With two old people who asked me about my day and then actually waited for the answer. Grandpa would hand me a wrench. Grandma would hand me a warm slice of that terrible bread. They never once made me prove I belonged. I told myself after the funeral that I had left that family behind years ago and felt nothing. The will had simply proved that I never really had. You cannot leave behind people who are still living rent-free in the part of you that flinches. I knew that the moment my mother's hand tightened on my arm in that parking lot. They were not done with me. And I was not nearly as far away as I had pretended. The lake house was a low cedar place that my grandfather had built up over 40 years. Room by room. The way some men build a life. I drove out the day after the reading to begin sorting their things. Because someone had to. And because I could not stand the idea of strangers doing it. The water was doing its evening thing when I arrived. Lapping against the dock pilings in that slow patient rhythm I had fallen asleep to as a child. My grandmother's lavender was still blooming along the porch rail. Gone a little wild without her. I stood there a long time and let the smell of it undo me. Inside the house smelled like cedar and old coffee. The wind-up clock in the hall. Grandpa's clock. The twin of the one he had given me. Ticked on. Faithful. Like it had not yet heard the news. I wound it the way he had taught me. Then I walked through the rooms and I let myself cry. Finally. The way I had not been able to in front of anyone else. And somewhere between his workbench and her kitchen I made a decision. I was not going to let this house become a thing they fought over from a distance. I was going to live in it. I would give up the apartment, and I would move out here, and I would be present. Because presence is 9/10 of keeping anything. I started carrying boxes in from my car that very night. I was halfway through the third trip, when I saw the slip of paper sitting on the kitchen counter. Folded once. In my mother's handwriting. Slid under the door at some point during the day while I had been out. Short and flat. The way my family liked their cruelty. Small enough to deny later. Family meeting Sunday. Be there? Not a question. Not a condolence. An order. Left in the house of the dead. In the home that was now legally mine. I set down the box I was holding. I stood very, very still. And somewhere in the back of my mind a quiet voice that sounded a little like my grandfather said, "Get ready." I went to the Sunday meeting because avoiding it would only delay it, and because I wanted to see the shape of what they intended to do. It was held at my parents' house in the formal dining room they used twice a year. They had set it up like a negotiation. My father at the head of the table. My mother to his right. Trevor across from an empty chair they had left for me far down at the other end. And of course Aunt Carol sat in the corner with her yellow legal pad. They had clearly talked beforehand. My mother did the speaking. She laid it out gently. Reasonably. The way you explain something to a slow child. The money would be managed by the family. A portion would clear the loan she and my father had taken out for her real estate venture. The one no one ever mentioned at holidays. A portion would help Trevor and his pregnant wife with their new house. The lake house, she said, would naturally come to Trevor in time for the children. And the rest would be set aside. She used that phrase like it meant something. Then she leaned forward and reached for the soft voice again. "Sign it over, Avery," she said. "Do the decent thing." There it was. The whole table looked at me. My father with cold certainty. Trevor with a kind of nervous greed. My mother with that wet weaponized warmth. They expected me to fold. The old Avery would have folded. The house guest. The spare. I felt the pull of it even then. The deep old family training that says peace is always worth more than your own ground. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said the only true thing I had. "I need to read a letter first." The room went absolutely still. My mother's smile faltered at the corners. "What letter?" she said. I stood up. I buttoned my coat. The way my father had done at the wool reading. And I left them sitting at their pretend negotiation, with their pretend plan, and the air in the room going cold around them. I did not know yet what was waiting for me inside my grandmother's old Bible. But I knew that whatever it was, they were terrified of it. The campaign started Monday morning. It came in soft. The way these things always do before they come in hard. My phone lit up with messages from relatives I had not heard from in years. An aunt I barely knew sent a long paragraph about how Grandma would have wanted the family whole. A cousin sent old photos of me as a child at the lake. Captioned with crying faces. As if nostalgia were a lever that could pry money loose. My mother sent a Bible verse about generosity. Trevor sent a sonogram with a one-line caption. "Think about him." None of them asked how I was doing. All of them assumed I was the problem to be solved. I recognized the pattern because I had run logistics for people who applied pressure for a living. So I did what I always did when something felt off. I made a file. I screenshot every single message. Dated each one. Dropped them into a folder. And I did not respond to any of them. I was not building a case yet. I want to be honest about that. I was not some chess master 10 moves ahead of everyone else. I was a grieving woman who had learned the very hard way that you do not win by reacting to people who want you reacting. You win by keeping your hands still and your records clean. I made coffee. I wound the clock. I carried more of my life out to the lake house one trip at a time. And every evening I sat on the dock and listened to the water against the pilings, and let myself feel exactly two things at the same time. The loss of two people who had loved me. And the slow cold certainty that the people who shared my blood were not going to stop until someone made them stop. I just did not yet know how loud they were willing to get. I was about to find out. Aunt Carol called me on Thursday. Carol was a paralegal, which in my family made her something close to a general. She did not bother with warmth. We wanted to give you a courtesy heads up, she said in the tone of a woman who had never given a courtesy in her entire life. The family is prepared to challenge the will. I asked her on what grounds. Undue influence, she said. Two vulnerable elderly people. One estranged granddaughter, who swooped in at the very end and walked away with everything. A jury sees that story very clearly, Avery. I almost laughed out loud. I had not swooped in. I had been kept out. But I knew even then that the truth, and what a contest could cost, were two very different things. A challenge could drag on for an entire year. It could bleed the estate dry in legal fees. It could turn my grandparents' careful wishes into a slow, ugly war. Carol was counting on exactly that. She was counting on me being scared of the process. What she did not count on was that I had spent my whole career inside processes. And they did not frighten me the way they frightened other people. Then she made her mistake. She got impatient. And impatient people leak information. Look, she said, lowering her voice. Your mother needs this settled before the bank moves on her. So let us all just be reasonable here. She caught herself a half-second too late. Before the bank moves on her. I wrote it down word for word. I thanked Aunt Carol for the courtesy heads up in a voice as flat as her own. And I hung up. And I sat with that one sentence for a long, long time. My mother was not just greedy. My mother was drowning. And drowning people do not let go. They pull you under with them. I called Walter the very next morning. I did not call him crying. I called him the way I would call a supplier with a list. He answered on the second ring, and he listened to all of it without once interrupting me. The undue influence threat. Carol's slip about the bank. The Sunday meeting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Let me set your mind at ease, he said. He walked me through it slowly. The will was as solid as a will could possibly get. He had drafted it himself. 2 disinterested witnesses. A video recording of the signing. A physician's letter dated the very same day confirming your grandparents understood exactly what they were doing. An undue influence claim has to be proven, Avery, he said. And the burden of proof falls on them. Not on you. They have nothing but their feelings. I asked him what they could really do. They can file, he said. They can make noise. They can spend their own money making more noise. Then he paused. There is something else you should know. Your grandfather added a clause. A no contest provision. I asked what that meant in plain English. It means, Walter said carefully, that anyone who challenges this will and loses forfeits whatever your grandparents did leave them. I sat straight up in my chair. They left them something. A token, he said. $20,000 each. To your father, your mother, and your brother. Raymond insisted on it. He said it was a test. I wrote down every single word. A test. My grandfather, dead in a field outside Asheville, had reached forward in time and laid a small quiet trap, baited with exactly the kind of money my family could not leave alone. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something stranger. I felt understood. He had known them. He had known me. And he had trusted me to be patient enough to let it work. Before we hung up, I asked Walter the question I had been circling for days. Why me? Why not split it? Why not soften it? Why hand one grandchild a fortune and light a fire under the entire family? He was quiet again. The way he got when he was deciding how much to say. Your grandparents talked about you a great deal, he said finally. More than you would ever guess. He told me they had noticed things. The graduation no one attended. The one Joan only heard about afterward and cried over for 2 days straight. The phone calls where Gerald spoke about me like a problem he was tired of. The Thanksgiving I had come home on leave and my father had called me a house guest in front of company. And I had smiled and helped with the dishes anyway. They wrote it down. Walter said. Not to use against anyone. Joan kept a journal. Raymond kept letters. They wanted a record of what they had seen. In case anyone ever claimed they had not seen it. I had not known any of that. Not a single word. I had spent years believing my grandparents simply had a soft spot for me. The way you have a soft spot for a stray. But they had been watching the whole time. And they had understood the shape of my family far better than I had ever let myself understand it. There is the letter too, Walter reminded me gently. Joan's letter. You have not read it yet. Have you? I admitted that I had not. I told him the truth. Which was that I was afraid of it. Some part of me was not yet ready to be loved on paper by two people who could no longer be hugged. Walter let that sit. Read it when you can, he said. She wrote it for the woman you are. Not for the girl they tried to make you. Then he wished me a good night. And the line went quiet. And the clock in my hallway ticked on. And I sat there in the dark for a long time wondering what my grandmother could possibly have written that her own daughter was so desperate to keep me from reading. They came to the lake on a Saturday. Uninvited. While I was out at the cooperative. I came back to find my father's truck in the drive and the two of them. Gerald and Trevor. Walking the property like assessors. They had a tape measure. They had a phone out. Taking pictures of the dock. The boat house. The view. They had walked straight through my grandmother's lavender to get a better angle. Crushing a whole section of it into the dirt. And the broken smell of it hung in the air like something grieving. I parked and got out slowly. My father did not even have the grace to look caught. Just getting a sense of the place, he said. For valuation. I asked who had let them in. It is the family home, Avery. And there it was again. That word family. Used like a key that opened any door but mine. Trevor would not meet my eyes. He kept measuring. My father walked up onto the porch. My grandfather's porch. And he stood there like he was already deciding what to tear down. It should have gone to family, he said for the second time. Quieter now. Almost to himself. Like a prayer he had worn smooth from repetition. I told them both evenly that they needed to leave. My father studied me for a moment. Surprised maybe that the house guest had a voice. Then he shrugged. And he walked back to his truck. Trevor lingered behind. You do not even live here, he muttered. And then, glancing through the front window at the boxes of my things stacked inside, he flushed deep red. Because he could see now that I did. They drove off. I went inside. Shaking just a little. And on the kitchen counter, where my mother's note had been, my father had left something new for me to find. A real estate agent's business card. Propped up against the salt shaker. Like a flag planted on land they had already decided was theirs. I picked it up. I turned it over in my fingers. And I understood that whatever was coming next was going to come fast. That night, finally, I read the letter. It had been waiting all this time in my grandmother's old leather Bible. The one she had kept on her nightstand for 40 years. Folded once and pressed flat between the thin pages of the Psalms. Exactly where Walter had said she had tucked it. Her handwriting had gone shaky in her last years. But it was unmistakably hers. The same loops that had signed my birthday cards for 34 years straight. I sat on the edge of her bed, and I read it by the light of the bedside lamp. With the lavender smell drifting in through the open window. And the clock ticking down the hall. She did not waste her words. She told me she loved me. And then she told me why she trusted me. And the why was a list of small things I had forgotten I had ever done. You fixed the dock the summer you were 14, she wrote. By yourself. In 2 days. And you never once told anyone or asked for thanks. She wrote about how I had sent them a card every single Christmas. From wherever the army had me stationed. Even the years when no one else in the family had remembered their anniversary. She wrote, "You are the only one who never asked us for a single thing. That is how we knew." And then near the bottom of the page. The line that reached into my chest and stayed there. "Use it the way we would be proud of," she wrote. "You will know what that means. Do not let anyone tell you that family is the people who share your name. Family is the people who would never make you prove that you belong." I read it 3 times. The first time I cried. The second time I understood it. The third time I felt something settle inside me. Hard and clear. Like a load finding its center on a truck. They had not left me a fortune. They had left me a charge. And whatever I decided to do with $40 million. I knew now that it was not going to be handed over to people who had walked through her lavender to measure the view. I folded the letter carefully. I put it back inside the Psalms. I turned off the lamp. And I went to sleep knowing that the next time my family knocked on this door, they were going to meet a different woman than the one they had measured the porch in front of. The next week Walter and I sat in his office and we walked the whole road ahead. Step by careful step. The way I used to brief a supply route before a mission. He laid out probate like a map. The will would be filed and validated by the court. As sole heir I would be required to notify the other potential heirs. Which meant my family would receive official notice whether they liked it or not. The estate would settle in stages. On the court's schedule. Not mine. And not theirs. The clock on his wall ticked the whole time he talked. And I found it steadying. The process I realized was going to take exactly as long as it took. And no amount of shouting from my family could speed it up or slow it down. That was the thing they did not understand about people like me. They thought patience was weakness. I had learned that patience, applied correctly, is a weapon that never tires. I asked Walter the only question that really mattered. If they filed their challenge, what should I do? Nothing dramatic, he said. You defend the will, which defends itself. And you let the no contest clause do its quiet work. I thought about it for a long moment. If I begged them not to file, they would file. If I tried to buy peace by handing over a slice, I would betray my grandmother's letter and teach my family that pressure worked on me. But if I simply stood still on solid legal ground and let them charge at the wall my grandfather had built, they would break themselves against it and forfeit even the token he had quietly left them. So I do not fight them, I said slowly. I just have to be as patient as the law is. Walter almost smiled. Your grandfather said something very close to that, he said. The day he signed. They filed 11 days later. Aunt Carol drew it up. My mother pushed it forward. And my father signed his name to a petition claiming that his own parents had been manipulated by their granddaughter into betraying their only son. I got the notice the same day Walter did. I read it standing at the kitchen counter. And I felt a strange sad calm settle over me. They had done it. They had walked straight into the wall. Certain it was a door. The petition was full of words like isolation and vulnerability and suspicious timing. None of which would survive contact with a video of two clear-eyed people signing in a lawyer's office while a physician stood by. But they did not know about the video. And they did not understand the clause. That afternoon my mother sent me a message. And it was the softest one yet. Which told me they thought the filing had given them leverage over me. We do not want this to get ugly, she wrote. Sign it over and we will drop everything. We can all just move on. Sign it over. Do the decent thing. The same sentence. Dressed for a different season. I did not reply to her. I forwarded the message to Walter. I dated it. And I added it to the file. I want you to understand that I felt no joy in any of this. These were not strangers. The man who had signed that petition had carried me on his shoulders when I was small. Before he decided I was a disappointment. The woman texting me about not getting ugly had braided my hair for school. But they had made their choice with their eyes wide open. And the law was not going to make an exception for the fact that we had once shared a Thanksgiving table. I poured a cup of coffee. I wound the clock. And I waited. My mother came to the lake alone 3 days after the filing. Near dusk. I almost did not recognize her at first. The careful warmth was completely gone. And what was left was a tired woman in a coat that was too thin for the wind coming off the water. She did not knock so much as appear on the porch. And when I opened the door, her face was doing something I had never seen it do in 34 years. It was afraid. Can I sit, she said. We sat on the porch steps. Not touching. The lavender bruised and sweet between us. And she told me the truth finally. The whole shape of it. The real estate venture had failed completely. She had borrowed against her own house to fund it. Certain that the inheritance would cover the gap when it came. The bank was now moving to foreclose. I am going to lose everything, Avery, she said. And her voice cracked on the last word in a way that no performance could fake. For one moment I did not see a villain sitting next to me. I saw a frightened woman who had bet her whole life on money that was never hers to bet. And lost. I felt the old pull hard. The one that says fix it. Make peace. Give them what they want and the fear will stop. I let myself feel it. Then I let it pass. I am sorry that you are scared, I said. I mean that. I am not signing the house away. But sit down. And let us talk about what real help could actually look like. For 1 second her eyes flickered with something like hope. Then she heard the part she did not want to hear. The part where I kept my ground. And her face hardened back into the mother I had always known. You always did think you were better than us, she said. And she stood up. And she walked back to her car. 3 days later the moving truck showed up in my driveway. But before the truck I have to tell you what I decided. Because the decision is the whole point of this story. More than any reveal that comes after it. After my mother drove off into the dark that night, I sat out on the dock until the stars came out. And I read my grandmother's letter again from memory. Use it the way we would be proud of. You will know what that means. And I did know. I had known maybe since the first time Walter had said the number 40 million out loud in his office. I thought about the dock and the bread and the two people who had never once made me prove that I belonged. I was not going to hoard $40 million. And I was certainly not going to hand it over to people who would simply burn through it, clearing a bad loan and buying a bigger house. I was going to do the thing my grandparents had hinted at in every quiet kindness of their lives. I was going to build something. A foundation. A fund for veterans coming home to a town that did not always know what to do with them. And for the older folks in that town who could not fix their own roofs anymore. And for kids like the one I had once been, who needed one single place where someone actually waited for the answer when they asked, "How was your day?" I would keep the lake house. Not as a trophy, but as the home of all of it. My grandparents' porch would belong to the whole community they had quietly loved for 60 years. I made the decision sitting on that dock. And I felt my grandfather's clock ticking faintly through the open window behind me. Counting it true. If my family wanted to know what I was going to do with $40 million, they were about to find out. And so was the whole town. I did not wait for my family to make their next move. I made mine first. The morning after my mother's visit, I called Walter and told him I wanted everything locked down properly on the record. So we did the unglamorous work that actually wins things. We filed the will for probate the moment the waiting period allowed. Once the court admitted the will, Walter as the executor recorded the transfer of the lake house left to me by name into my own name with the county. So that the question of who had the right to be in it stopped being a feeling anyone could argue about, and became a fact stamped by a clerk. We assembled the defense file against their petition, the signing video, the 2 witness statements, the physician's letter, my grandmother's journal, my grandfather's dated notes. I made copies. Then I made copies of the copies. And I kept one clean set in a folder I could carry in a single hand. I had run supply convoys with far less paperwork. Then I asked Walter the question I had been turning over in my mind since the real estate card had appeared by my salt shaker. What happens if they try to force me out of the house? He took off his glasses. Legally the house is yours to hold, he said. The will has been admitted. The transfer has been recorded. Either way, possession is yours while the estate settles. If they show up and try to remove you themselves, that is not an eviction, Avery. There is no court order. There is no standing. It is trespass. And depending on how they do it, it is worse than that. I asked him to put that in writing. A clear cease and desist. Ready to hand to anyone who needed reminding whose land they were standing on. He said he would have it ready within the week. I drove back out to the lake that evening. And for the first time since the crash, I slept all the way through the night. Not because I had won anything yet, but because I had done my part. The way my grandparents had done theirs. And now all that was left was to let people show me exactly who they were. Trevor called me the night before everything came to a head. And for once, he did not sound entitled. He sounded cornered. Avery, please, he said. And the please landed strange in my ear. A word I could not remember him ever using with me in our entire lives. He told me what I had already half guessed. He and his wife had taken out a loan. A real one. Against the future. Because for years the whole family had told him the lake house would come to him for the kids. Repeated it enough holidays that he had stopped hearing it as a wish and started hearing it as a deed. He had renovated their current place. He had put down money he did not have on the strength of a promise that was never anyone's to make. The baby is coming in 6 weeks, he said. You do not even live here, Avery. But this time the old line came out small and frightened. Not as an accusation, almost as a plea. As if reminding me that I was a stranger here might make me feel guilty enough to fix his entire life. I felt for him. I really did. He was 30 years old. And he had built his whole future on a sentence other people had handed him. "Trevor," I said as gently as I could. "I never promised you this house." "They did. They promised you something that was never theirs to give." He was quiet. I could hear his wife somewhere behind him. I told him there might be a path forward. Someday. A real one. But not like this. Not with a contest in a moving truck. He did not seem to hear that part. He only heard that I would not simply hand it over to him. And the line went cold. And then dead. I set the phone down. I knew then that they were going to push it all the way to the wall my grandfather had built. And I knew the wall would hold. I just hated that they were going to find out the hard way. The ultimatum arrived the next morning. As a letter. Hand-delivered. In my father's blocky engineer's print. He had always preferred paper to conversation. It was short and certain. The way men are certain when they have never once been told no by their own family. I was to vacate the lake house by Sunday. If I did not, they would. In his exact words. Remove you ourselves. And let the court sort it out afterward. He had it backward, of course. He thought possession was 9/10 of the law. And that if they simply put my things out on the lawn and moved Trevor in, the courts would shrug and accept the new arrangement. He did not understand that a recorded deed does not care who is sleeping in the house. He did not understand that you cannot evict an owner. He ended the letter the way he ended everything. With the sentence he had worn down to a nub. It should have gone to family. Third time I had heard or read it. And it had stopped stinging somewhere around the second. It had become almost informative. Every time he said it. He told me exactly how small his idea of family was. How it had a fence around it. And how I had always been standing on the other side of that fence in his mind. No matter how many Christmas cards I had ever sent. I read the letter twice. And I did not feel afraid. I felt the strange clear calm I used to feel before a long operation. When the planning was done. And all that remained was execution. Sunday. They had named the day themselves. They had told me when they were coming. And how. And with what intentions. And they had no idea, they had just handed me the one thing a logistics officer values above absolutely everything else. Advanced notice. I did not plan a confrontation. I want to be very clear about that. Because it would be easy to make myself sound like a general laying an ambush. I planned a Sunday. I planned it the way I planned everything. By working backward from the moment that mattered. And making sure the right things would be in the right place at the right time. First the documents. I made a clean folder. The recorded deed with the county stamp. The will. The signing video on a drive. The physician's letter. And Walter's cease and desist with my father's name already typed across the top of it. Second. Walter himself. I called and asked if he would be willing to be present on Sunday morning. Not as a lawyer making a scene. But simply as the executor of the estate. Standing where the executor had every legal right to stand. He said he would not miss it for the world. Third. And this is the part one thought about hardest. I called the county sheriff's office. I did not ask them to arrest anyone. I told them the plain simple truth. That I was the recorded owner of a property. That family members had delivered a written threat to remove me by force on Sunday morning. And that I wanted a deputy present to keep the peace. Because a crowd and a moving truck and a deed dispute was exactly the kind of thing that turned bad. The dispatcher took it very seriously. She said a deputy would be there. And that was all. No trap. No trick. No clever speech rehearsed in front of the mirror. Just the law. Quietly arranged. To already be standing in my driveway. When my family arrived to break it. I spent Saturday night cleaning the house, and winding the clock, and watering what was left of my grandmother's lavender. Then I made coffee for the morning. Set the folder by the door. And went to bed. Sunday was coming. And I intended to meet it standing up. I did not sleep much that last night. But it was not fear that kept me awake. It was the house itself. I sat out on the dock past midnight with a blanket and a cold cup of coffee. And I let the place hold me one more time. Before whatever Sunday was going to be. The water moved against the pilings in the dark. That same patient lapping. The sound my grandfather had said could teach a person everything they needed to know about persistence. If they listened to it long enough. The lavender. What survived of it? Breathed out its sweetness into the cool night air. And through the open window behind me. I could just barely hear the clock ticking off the last hours. Steady as a pulse. 3 things my grandparents had loved. The water. The flowers. The time. I had spent my childhood summers inside all 3 of them. Without knowing they were a kind of inheritance more real than any number Walter could ever read aloud. I thought about my grandmother's letter. I thought about my grandfather signing his quiet test 2 full years before he died. Trusting that one of us would have the patience to let it work. I thought about my father's fence. And which side of it I had always stood on. And how I had stopped somewhere in the last few weeks wanting to be let in. I did not need their gate anymore. I had a whole lake. I am not a praying woman. I never learned how. And the army did not teach it. So that night I just listened to the water. And I let the clock do its work. And I let the lavender say whatever it was that lavender says. Around 3 in the morning I went inside and lay down. The folder was by the door. The coffee was ready. And Sunday, when it came, grey and still over the water, was waiting. They came at 9 in the morning in a small convoy. The way you arrive somewhere you have already decided you own. First my father's truck. Then a rented moving truck. The big kind. Its diesel engine rattling the morning quiet. Then my mother's car. And behind it Aunt Carol's. And behind that, a cousin or 2 they had brought along as witnesses. The way you bring witnesses when you want a thing to look official. They parked across the grass without a single thought for it. My father got out first and stood there, surveying the property like a man arriving at a job site. Trevor climbed down from the cab of the moving truck. He would not look at the house. He would not look at me. My mother came up the lawn with her chin set hard. The fear from the porch steps packed away somewhere. Replaced by the brittle certainty of a woman with no exits left. Aunt Carol had her yellow legal pad. The cousins hung back by the cars. Already uneasy. I was standing on my grandfather's porch with my coffee. In no particular hurry at all. My mother reached the bottom step and looked up at me. And she went straight to the sentence. Because it had worked on me my whole life. Sign it over, Avery, she said. Do the decent thing. My father climbed the steps right past her. Up onto the porch. Walking through the last living stretch of my grandmother's lavender to get there. Crushing it under his good Sunday shoes without a flicker of awareness. He stopped 1 foot away from me. Using his height the way he always had. We are done waiting, he said. Get your things. And I watched his face. ready to answer, when his eyes moved past me, toward the side of the house, toward the two people who had just stepped quietly out from around the corner, where they had been waiting the whole time. And my father stopped talking. The whole front yard went still. Even the moving truck seemed to hold its breath. The first person to come around the corner was Walter Howrin, in his grey Sunday suit, moving slow and certain, the estate file tucked carefully under his arm. The second was a uniformed deputy from the county sheriff's office, with his thumbs hooked in his belt, in no hurry at all. My father's mouth was still half open on the end of a sentence he never finished. My mother's hand flew up to her chest. Aunt Carol's pen stopped moving. I set my coffee down on the porch rail. I picked up the folder I had left by the door, and I walked down the steps to meet them on the grass, where everyone could see. I did not raise my voice. I have found in my life that you almost never need to. This is Walter, I said, the executor of the estate. And this is Deputy Reyes from the county. I asked them both to be here this morning. Then I held out the folder to my father. He did not take it. So I held it out until the silence in the yard made him take it. That is the executor's deed to this house, I said. Walter recorded it with the county the moment the court admitted the will into my name. That is the will. That is the physician's letter. And that is a video of your parents signing it. Clear-eyed. In Walter's office. The deputy spoke then. Easy and flat. The voice of a man who had broken up 100 of these in his career. This property is legally hers, folks, he said. There is no court order here. Any attempt to remove her or her belongings is trespass. And I will treat it that way. The truck needs to leave. But it was Walter who delivered the part that took all the air out of all of them. He opened the file, slid out a single page, and held it up so that my father could see his own signature on the petition. When you filed your challenge, Walter said, almost gently, you walked straight into the no contest clause Raymond built into this will. If you press it and lose, and you will lose, you have no evidence, and a video that buries you. You forfeit every cent he set aside for you. A judge will speak the last word on it, Gerald. But you did not put this estate in play at a hearing. You put it in play the day you signed this. My mother lunged for the page. The deputy's arm came up, unhurried, and stopped her cold. And that was the moment my family came apart all at once. The way a thing comes apart, when the pressure it was built on suddenly has nowhere left to go. My mother started screaming about lawyers and lies, her voice cracking up into a register I had never heard from her before. All the careful warmth gone for good. My father went a deep, dangerous red and jabbed his finger at Walter. At me. At the deed in his hands. Sputtering about ungrateful daughters and stolen birthrights. Trevor sat straight down on the porch steps and put his head in his hands. The cousins by the cars began edging back toward their vehicles, having signed up to witness a victory. Not this. And I stood in the middle of all of it, perfectly still, holding the folder. And I felt nothing I had to perform. My father turned on me last, his voice ragged, and he reached for the only weapon he had ever needed in his entire life. It should have gone to family, he shouted. The fourth time. The last time. And in the quiet right after it. With the deputy beside me. And the lavender crushed under his shoes. And my grandfather's clock ticking faintly through the open window behind me. I gave him the only answer I had been saving for 34 years. It did go to family, I said evenly. You just could never see who that was. He had no reply. There was none to have. I told them then the thing that I think hurt them worst of all. Because it was true. And because it was kind. And because kindness was the one thing they had never expected from the house guest. I told them I had been ready to bring them in. That I had a plan that would have helped my mother with real guidance. Helped Trevor stand on his own 2 feet. Honored the family in a way that would have lasted for generations. You could have had a sister, I told Trevor. Not unkindly. Instead you brought a truck. Walter let the numbers do the rest. Because numbers were the only language my family had ever fully trusted. He laid it out plainly standing on the grass. While the deputy waited by the moving truck to make sure that it left. The petition would almost certainly be dismissed. They had no evidence. And a video that buried them. The legal fees they had already run up were theirs to pay out of pockets that were not deep. And the no contest clause meant that the $20,000 each that Raymond had left them. The small mercy he had folded into his test. Would be forfeit the moment a judge ruled against them. And every single sign pointed to a judge ruling against them. They had come for $40 million. And they were leaving with less than they had walked in with. My mother heard the word foreclosure somewhere inside all of that. And the fight went out of her between one breath and the next. She sat down on the bottom step near her son. And for a moment she was just the frightened woman from the porch again. I am going to lose the house, she said. To no one in particular. And here is the part one have thought about most in the months since that morning. I did not gloat. I did not forgive. Not exactly. But I did not gloat. I crouched down near her. And I said quietly. So that the cousins could not hear. That I would not save her loan. Because saving it would only teach everyone watching that the truck had worked. But I gave her a name. A financial counselor. A real one. And the number for a county program that helped people restructure before the bank moved. Mercy is not money, I told her. But it is not nothing either. She did not thank me. I did not expect her to. The deputy nodded at the truck driver. The big diesel coughed and started. And one by one, my family got back in their cars and left the way they had come. The following week I told the whole town what $40 million was actually for. I did it at the community center. The small one with the bad heating. Where my grandmother had once run the Christmas drive every year for 2 decades. And I did it plainly. Because that was how Raymond and Joan had done everything. I announced the Crane Lake Foundation. The money would not sit in an account. And it would not buy me a bigger life. It would go to work. Scholarships for kids in a town that did not have many. Roof repairs and ramps for the older folks who had given that town 60 years and could not climb a ladder anymore. And most of all, a program for veterans coming home. The ones who came back to a place that loved them. But did not always know how to reach them. The way no one had quite known how to reach me. The lake house would be the heart of it. Not a museum. Not a trophy. A place with an open door, and a long table, and a porch where someone would always wait for the answer. When you said, "How was your day?" I hung my grandparents' photo back in the hallway. Beside the clock. Where Grandpa could keep his eye on the time. And Grandma could keep her eye on the lavender. I had spent a whole weekend coaxing back to life. People came up to me afterward. Some had known my grandparents personally. Some had only heard the story the way small towns hear stories. A few of them cried. And through all of it, the old clock kept its steady patient tick. The way it had ticked through the crash and the reading and the truck. Counting out a future my grandparents had reached forward 2 years to make sure I would have the patience to build. They had not left me a fortune. They had left me a charge. And I had finally figured out what it meant. The petition was dismissed 2 months later, in a hearing that took less than a single hour. My family did not contest the dismissal. There was nothing left to contest. And no money left to do it with. The no contest clause held exactly as my grandfather had designed it to hold. And the small bequests passed instead into the foundation. Which felt right. Like the last piece of his test clicking quietly shut. My mother lost her house that fall. I had warned her. And I had given her the name and the number. And she had used neither. And I made my peace a long time ago with the fact that some people would rather drown holding onto their pride than swim toward a hand they have already decided to hate. My father I have not spoken to since the porch. I do not expect to. His fence was always going to be the thing he died behind. And I stopped trying to climb it the day I realized I had a whole lake. But Trevor surprised me. 3 weeks after the baby came. A boy. He sent me a message. Not a long one. Just I am sorry. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about the small frightened pleas. On the phone. And the way he could not look at the house. And how 30 years old is plenty old enough to know better. And still young enough to learn. I did not write him back a paragraph. I wrote. When you are ready to mean it. You know where the lake is. I have not heard from him again yet. But the door is open. The way my grandmother taught me a door should always be. Neither locked nor flung wide. Just unlatched. For whoever is willing to do the work of walking through it. The foundation is real now. With a board and a budget and a roof crew that stays busy year-round. The first veteran we placed in transitional housing finished his degree this spring. And he stood on my grandfather's porch and shook my hand. And he could not quite get the words out. So we just stood there together for a minute. Looking at the water. And that was enough. I still live in the lake house. I still wind the clock every Sunday morning. The way Grandpa taught me when I was 9. And on summer evenings I sit out on the dock. The one my grandmother wrote about in her letter. The one I fixed when I was 14 and never told anyone about. And I listen to the water move against the pilings. Slow and patient. And for the first time in my entire life. I do not feel like a house guest anywhere on this earth. The house is mine. The lake is mine. And no one will ever again make me prove that I belong somewhere I was always meant to be. I learned the hard way. And the lasting way. That family is not the people who share your blood. Or your name. Or your Thanksgiving table. Family is the people who would never once make you prove that you belong. And the moment you truly understand that, you stop knocking on doors that were always going to stay shut against you. And you go build a house of your own. With the door already open. For whoever comes walking up the path next. That is my story. A plane that never landed. A truck that had to leave empty. And a letter folded inside an old Bible. That told me exactly who I was. When my own family had spent 34 years telling me otherwise. If anyone in your life has ever made you fight to be counted as their family, I want you to take this story as your sign tonight. To stand quietly and firmly in your own worth. You do not owe anyone access to your peace. You do not owe anyone the keys to a house they walked through your lavender to reach. And you do not owe anyone an apology for being chosen by the people who actually saw you. If this story moved something in you tonight, if you have ever sat in a room full of your own blood and felt like a stranger, I need you to do 3 small things for me right now. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next story. Tap that like button so this one reaches the next person who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below telling me about the moment you finally chose yourself. I read every single one. I will see you in the next story. Sleep well tonight. And remember, the quietest person in the room is rarely the weakest.